Okay, I just want to give you a brief run through as to how we can deploy some modern database loads to Fluid. So in this particular instance, we've got a Fluid cluster set up, and I want to show you how we can deploy a highly available, replicated, and sharded database in CockroachDB just in a few minutes across a Kubernetes cluster. Here we go. We are in, we can see my environments here. So I'm going to go ahead and add a Kubernetes cluster to lab cluster 01. And we're just going to call it demo DB. We're going to set our Kubernetes version to, lowercase, sorry. We're going to set our Kubernetes version to 125. Doesn't need to be secure. And we're just going to give it an obscure service CIDR. So create this, and obviously now we wait for our Kubernetes cluster to provision. So it's a couple of minutes for it to go into the backend and configure and deploy that cluster. Whilst that's happening, we're just going to have a quick read through deploying CockroachDB using their automated Kubernetes operator. So it's just fairly straightforward. We don't need to look at our cloud configuration because we have that in Fluid. However, once we go past EKS, we can start looking. Cool, we have a custom resource definition, some manifests to deploy, and that's fairly straightforward. And we should expect to see some pods pretty early in that process. So let's see what that looks like. See how our cluster's coming along now, and see if demo DB has provisioned yet. Doesn't look like it has just yet. Just needs a couple more, another minute or so, and we should be ready to go. There we go. Demo DB is ready to go. So now we can simply download that kubeconfig file. And you'll see that's going to download to my downloads, and that's going to be called demodb.kube. So we can go ahead into our terminal interface here, and we can do a kubectl kubeconfig. Let's go demodb kube.yaml, and then get nodes. So now we can see that that cluster is up and online, and we can access that over the internet. To see there, that cluster is 46 seconds old. So let's start deploying that workload and get that database up and running and distributed. So again, we start past our cloud. We starting CockroachDB. So we have a manifest with some CRDs to apply here. So let's just go ahead and do that. While we wait for that to apply, we were expecting to see that the CRDB clusters has created. There we go, we've now seen that. So here we can go and create some of these defaults, or just use the default namespace settings, which is what we're going to do for now, just in the interest of speeding the demo along. And we're expecting that to create a number of operators, deployments, cluster role bindings, but create some resources. So let's go do that. Configure that operator with its default settings. We can see they're all successfully creating. We don't need to set our context right now, but we can go ahead and get pods and see that, set that namespace, which is going to be operator system. And we can see that that operator manager is now starting to wind up. So obviously from 17 seconds ago. So as it happens, we can begin to consider initializing our cluster. So here we have just a really basic example of what a cluster looks like. We can just download that file here. And if we were to look at that example.yaml file, we can see storage requests, memory. Let's just make this one 10 gigs. Right. We can see those definitions for that deployment. Pretty straightforward, but that looks good to me. Go back and have a look at that pod deployment. We'll see that's now running and successfully running. So we can now look to deploy that manifest that we just configured example.yaml. So let's deploy that. And we've now created a type CockroachDB. So what we're expecting now is to see a stateful set booting up. So if we go back to look at our pods, it's winding that down. There we go. We can see it's winding down that VCheck, and it's now starting to wind up 3 database instances. So these take about 30 seconds to boot, thereabouts. And then once they go through their initialization sequence, they will boot. And then we have that sharded database available to us. Now, I will point out that all the connectivity that I'm running here is actually happening through the internet service. So I'm not connected to a VPN. My infrastructure is behind the firewall, living in my corporate environment. I've just configured that environment. I've got created that kube config, or created that kube cluster, and I've gotten access to that kube config, much like I would if I deployed a service on EKS or GKE. So super straightforward. We see two of those are running. One's finalizing its initialization, and they'll be ready shortly. So we'll just give that a second. And we look through, we can now look to actually start to deploy our kubectl client operator and open a SQL SQL UI into that cluster. So there we go. We've got 3 clusters running, so we can now deploy the built-in SQL client. So what we'll do here is we'll just copy that. And again, we're just going to run it just because I'm taking a shortcut here by manually specifying the kube config file. We'll create that secure operator. So that's deployed. And then we can now look to deploy. Don't want dictation, but we can now look to deploy a client pod so we can connect to that database that we've just created. So we've just got to give it a few seconds to obviously create that client secure. So it's 30 seconds or so. It's downloading a new image, it's creating a pod, and that pod gives me a client to connect. So you see that's now up. I go in, I can now run my SQL client and get a Postgres SQL into my cluster. Cool, right? And we can start running a couple of really basic commands. Now, the Cockroach example gives us a couple of basic examples like create database bank, create a table with primary key and a balance, cool, in bank accounts, easy enough. Insert into, here's a value, so let's call it $1234.56 in that account in key 1, inserted, right? And now we can select from bank accounts and see, that that's written in there. There's our balance, and we can now see, look, execution time is pretty low for database. Our network execution time is infinitesimal. Cool. So let's now create an admin user. So we can create a user. We'll call it Fluid, and we'll create that. We'll make that password Fluid as well, just for simplicity. Created a user, and now I want to grant admin rights to that user. So we can do that right here by granting admin to Fluid. Done. I've just run some database commands. Now, let's say, how do we get access to this outside of our world? Well, we can simply go down to run our kube config file and do something like a port forward. From my client, service CockroachDB public. And the port is 23257, I think, or 24257. Maybe not. So let's have a look. So kube control, we'll go back into this command here, and let's do get service and see where our service is run. Cool, there it is. It happens to be 26257 for CockroachDB public. So we'll just update that, 26257. Run that command, and we're now port forwarding. So now the local port on my machine is now pointing to that clusterable endpoint. Cool. So we can now open up a client like Postico, which is a just a graphical interface to Postgres, and we can run. We set our username and password to Fluid. The host is 127.0.0.1 on 262.5.7. Let's connect. You see, I've now connected to that database using a visual console, and I can now see that table accounts. And in accounts, I can see one record with balance 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can also go ahead and start running SQL queries. So I can say select star from accounts. And you see that query time is pretty quick, 29 milliseconds for that get. And we can start to look at what the that cluster looks like from a hardened point of view. So if you go get pods over here, and we see we've got 3 pods over there. They've been running for 5 minutes. We're still doing those queries. Let's delete a pod. CockroachDB 2. We've deleted that pod. And as that pod shuts down, we keep running those queries. We'll see that database is still very much alive, right? It's a bit upset there, but just waiting for that callback to come. But that's, there we go, we're deleted. And we see we're now spinning up a new pod, and we're still easily making quick queries, 30 milliseconds, 50 milliseconds into that database. So just within a few minutes there, we're able to deploy a Kubernetes cluster, deploy a pretty sophisticated database that's sharded across 3 nodes, across all the nodes in that cluster, that's then highly available, and start connecting to that and pushing data to that. So you can see how easy it is, especially in Fluid. It gives you that Kubernetes flexibility, of deploying very complex and advanced, highly available services. But we're now doing it on-prem even easier than we would have been doing it in the cloud and getting access through cloud services and that RBAC procedure. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to showing you some more awesome and cool things that Fluid can really enable you and your enterprise to do.